Thanks for stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the Jeff Rowland Design Group Model 3 Monoblock Power Amplifier. These sold between 1987 and 1991 for approximately $4,500 a piece, which would be around $11,000 today. They were rated at 100 watts into 8 ohms or 200 watts into 4 ohms and 320 watts into 2 ohms. They weigh 45 pounds and are very sturdily built, as you can sort of tell. We'll open one up and see what's inside in just a short bit. These were brought to me by my good buddy, let's just call him Richard, to check out. It turns out they had some fuse issues, and other than that they seem to be okay. But these are actually prototype Model 3 amplifiers, and you'll see in the back they're actually labeled serial number PRA and PRB. I think prototype A and prototype B. I actually called the Jeff Rowland Design Group and spoke to the man himself, Jeff Rowland, a really neat and nice guy, and had an interesting conversation with him, and he shared a little bit of information with me about the amplifiers, and there actually is an upgrade to this amplifier. But these are prototype units, so they look a little bit different from the back than the Model 3s that were used in production. And so keep that in mind with the data that I present a little later on. So right now I'm going to zoom in on the front. There's really not a lot to see on the front, and then we'll look around back, and then I will pop the cover and you can see what it looks like inside. The on-off switch for the Model 3 is this guy right here. It is depressed for a second or two, and when it is released, hopefully a small orange glow will come on behind it. The Jeff Rowland Design Group logo is etched into the front panel. There is some discoloration of the front panel. I don't really know what's causing that, but this thing is approaching 40 years old. This obviously is the rear view of the Model 3, and we have both balanced and unbalanced inputs. We have our three-way binding posts. We have a unswitched AC outlet, which is welcome, and our standard three-prong AC power connector socket, as well as some handles to help lug this 45-pound monster around when necessary. There's also a DIN connector here. I probably should have asked Jeff when I had him on the phone what that was for, but it's some kind of a DIN connector. Here is the Model 3 with the top cover removed, and the first thing that jumps out at you are these big capacitors. They are 27,000 microfarad at 75 volt. Also, this back circuit board right here, that is socketed into the main chassis and can be removed, and Jeff said there is an upgrade for that. There are two fuses, one right here and one right here. And let me scan up a little bit. So right here is the power transformer, and that is a pretty big guy taking up a lot of space inside there. You can see the transistors, they're bipolar devices, and that's kind of what it looks like. I will try to get just a little bit different view of this guy. Here is a little bit different view of what's inside the Model 3. You can see more of the circuit board that can be upgraded if you remove it. And if you look close enough, you can see the bus bar that they're using for one of their power supply rails. This guy right here, I think you can just see it. It's a copper bus bar that they're using. So there are some power supply capacitors here, and then there is a bridge rectifier underneath as well. It's just kind of another view showing everything that I can see with the top cover removed. I should point out that for all the measurements, I have one Model 3 prototype stacked upon the other, and I'm just running them as a normal stereo amp. So here we have our first measurement, which is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz into an 8 ohm load for each of the monoblocks. And the THD looks pretty darn good, and the SNR looks very good as well. Also note that we're showing about 26 dB of gain for the monoblocks. Here we have the frequency response of the pair of Jeff Rowland Monoblock Model 3 prototype amplifiers. They're putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms at this point. And while I could not find a specification for the frequency response, they're down not more than half a dB at 20 kilohertz, which is pretty good. And they are matched to within 0.05 dB of each other, which is very good. Bumping up the power a bit to 60 watts into 8 ohms, we see that the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz is less than 0.04% or 0.1% depending on the channel. The SNRs are both really good in the upper 90s, and the THD plus noise is around 60 or 68 dB depending on which channel you're looking at. Still not too bad. Here we have the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz with the monoblocks putting out 100 watts into 8 ohms. And there is actually a specification for the regular production Model 3s, and that was that the THD had to be less than 0.08% at 1 kilohertz into an 8 ohm loads at 100 watts. So basically, I'm going to say we're meeting that requirement. The left channel is a little worse than the right channel, especially the SNR is about 10 dB down. And the THD plus noise is also not as good on the left channel, but overall at 100 watts, this thing is doing pretty darn good. Hooking up the Model 3 prototypes to 4 ohm loads and having them put out about 10 watts, we can see that it still looks pretty good. It's not as clean as 5 watts into 8 ohms, but it's still not too bad. And here we have the frequency response of the monoblocks putting out 10 watts into 4 ohms. It is not quite as clean as the 8 ohm case, but it's still not too bad. Maybe a half a dB down at 20 kilohertz, and looks like the left channel has a little bit of oscillation going on there, but that's like a tenth of a dB, which really wouldn't be audible. And once again, this is the prototype. Cranking up the power so that we have 200 watts into 4 ohms. The monoblocks are performing quite admirably with less than 0.06% THD, and the SNRs are both in the 97 dB range. The THD plus noise is in the mid 60s, which is pretty good. And also note the gain still is about 26 dB. So overall, this thing is doing really well at this higher power level. There was a requirement for sensitivity for the production Model 3, and that was 136 millivolt input should be able to get you 1 watt output into 8 ohms. 136 millivolt is pretty close to minus 17.5 dBV, and we're getting about, we'll call it 860 milliwatts out into 8 ohms. So it's pretty close. Once again, this was a prototype, so it may not have had that exact requirement. This plot is showing the noise of both of the monoblocks. Now the amplifiers are running into 8 ohms, but there is no signal. The input for each amplifier is terminated into a short, and so you're just looking kind of at the noise of the system, which predominantly is the 60 hertz and 120 hertz power supply hum. Here we have the multi-tone response for the two Model 3 prototype monoblocks, and it's showing about 13 dB of distortion-free range. This plot shows the THD versus frequency at a couple different power levels, with the monoblocks going into 8 ohm loads, and the most amount of power was 67 watts, and that also gave the highest distortion, which was less than 0.1%, which is still pretty good for these guys. The Left channel did not look as good as the right channel, but 0.1% THD is pretty darn good. Our last piece of data shows the output impedance for the two Jeff Rowland Model 3 prototype monoblock power amplifiers. There is a spec on the production Model 3 which said it was greater than 120 from the 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz range and 8 ohms. At best case, I calculate a damping factor of 57, which is still one of the better ones that I needed to point out once again that these are prototype Model 3 amplifiers, and at least based on the back panel, they are different than the production amplifiers. I should have asked Jeff Rowland when I was speaking with him if there were any differences that he remembered as to changes in the circuitry between the prototype and the production amplifiers, but alas, I did not. I was just so happy that I was able to speak to him in person that I forgot to ask him about that. Be that as it may, I did quite a bit of listening to the Model 3 prototype amplifiers. First with the Wilson 3 Puppy 2 speakers, and these things sounded really good, as you would expect. And then I hooked them up to the more demanding KEF 107 reference speakers, and they also did equally as nice a job. I played it as loud as I normally did, and the amplifiers did not seem taxed whatsoever. My guess is that you could hook this pair of amplifiers up to most any speaker and not have any fears about the speakers causing the amplifiers any problems. They got quite loud. I played them to about 90 dB SPLs at some point, which is very loud in my room. And after letting the music go on for a while, and the amplifiers never reached more than about 95 degrees F on the heat sinks, normally on the back part. The top was warm, but not as warm as the heat sinks, usually these guys here. I did not test them with the amps on top of each other. They were separated on the floor, and they sounded just fine. Now, there are a few little nuances, and I don't know if that's because these are prototypes or old or what, but when you first plug either amplifier into the AC outlet, there is a small, very small pop that you hear coming out of the speaker. And when you first power on either amplifier, you will hear that same pop as well. There are no pops when the amplifiers are turned off. As far as the quality of the sound, they're really good. The sound seemed great on these. By that I mean I didn't hear any kind of distortion going on, and even when I cranked really loud, I didn't hear anything in the high end or the low end. They seemed to deliver plenty of bass and highs. And I suppose if you were able to afford a pair of these, they would be a great pair of monoblock amplifiers to own. They should handle any speaker that is hooked up to them. And it was also a pleasure to talk to Mr. Rowland, and he was very nice, and I felt that was kind of an honor. Once again, I thank you for watching, and I love to hear your comments in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, and if you have not subscribed, that would be nice to do as well. And until next time, have a great day or night.